Okay. Hello, my name is Callie Gulagatides. We're at St. George in Clifton today, and we're going to be doing an oral history on the Greek diaspora and your Greek American experience here. Um, so I'd like to start off by asking you, where was your family originally from?
My family, my father and mother, are originally from the island of Galimas, which is one of the 12 Dodekanissos Islands, right off the coast of Turkey. And the families, I think, knew each other, but they eventually met here in the U.S. after they emigrated, I guess. And my grandmother's family, my father's family was, his father died during the war because he gave all his food to the other people, and he died of starvation during World War II. And my mother's family is originally from Kalimos, but they ended up in Russia, where my mother was born.
Mm-hmm.
And and most of her children were born in Russia, except for my aunt who was born here, the last one, the ninth child.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother had 9 children. And
So can you talk about why your mom ended up going to Russia?
my grandfather, her father, was a um, well, they weren't too many jobs in Greece at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and this is in the early 20th century, and so they went to Russia for business, to make money and to work before the Russian Revolution.
Okay.
So
So like 1917.
Yeah, the 17 was the revolution.
Right.
So the Tsar was in charge, and they did well there. They had a business in leather goods. I think making slippers, I believe, and they moved and met several places in Russia. I think he was one of his family members, or brother or cousins. I'm not sure. Um, and the story of their survival after the revolution started, they were still there,
Mm-hmm.
was to escape Russia and go back to Greece because the Bolsheviks or the communists
Mm-hmm.
were basically killing everybody. And if they found you with even just a dollar, or not a dollar, but a money with the Tsar's image on it, they would kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories, based on the history I mentioned in the autobiography of my grandmother, she tells the stories about how they escaped because my uncle Nick, her oldest child, was a violinist. He was a child prodigy, and he played throughout Europe in front of, I don't know, some kings and queens, and he used to travel. But he was so good that that's why they escaped. The story goes, when they were in Russia, they went to the final commissioner at this exit to cross the border.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 2 doors. One door was you got executed. The other door, you were set free to cross the border. And the, my my grandfather told them that their son he wanted to go play under a special famous violinist and study under him,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't believe him. And the commissioner who was in charge of that was also Greek, but he was working for the communists.
Mm-hmm.
So my uncle Nick played for him, and he loved it so much, he let the family go.
Mm-hmm.
So because of him playing the violin, the family got out of Russia.
Wow.
When they went to the correct door. So
Right.
anyway, that's one of the stories. But there were other things going on in Russia during that time. The travels through they lost their furniture on a sleigh with horses
Mm-hmm.
in the lakes. I mean, the whole saga goes on forever. It's a story I didn't remember until I read it the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why they ended up in Russia. And most of her children were born in Russia, except for, I'm not sure about all of them, but I know my aunt Maria, the last child, was born here
Okay.
when they came to the U.S. And she's about 9 years older than me,
Okay.
and was my babysitter when I was a baby. So, and she still lives in Florida now. But see, what else did you want to know about Russia? About Russia?
So they were in Russia for. Sorry, that's a little blurry for me. I just want to confirm.
Okay,
So the
sure.
part where she was in Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah. Well, they not. Well, they
Like
were there
right
eventually.
before?
They were there. They got there when she was born in 1915.
Okay.
So they were right before
Right before,
the
like 2 years.
revolution. But the family was there uh, before that.
Right.
They went there early because my grandmother got married in 1906.
Okay.
And so soon after that, they ended up in Russia.
Right. Okay.
And in those days, Russia was not only, my mother was actually born in Azerbaijan.
Okay.
It's
So the near abroad.
It's right near, yeah, Baku is the name of the city. And I think she was the oldest girl.
Okay.
I think she was the second born. Uncle Nick, the violinist.
Mm-hmm.
He also ended up being, must be in the genes. He ended up being a conductor of two symphony orchestras. He played piano, violin, and gave lessons. He gave lessons in piano,
Right.
gave lessons in violin. He gave me lessons in violin, but I didn't go for it too much. About a year. But he lived in Nutley, and he had the Nutley Symphony Orchestra and the Mountain Lake Symphony.
Oh, wow.
And they used to go to his concerts he'd invite us to his concerts once or twice a year. That was a big event when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
He used to come out to Jersey. Back in those days, it was all by subway and bus.
Right.
We had no car. So, but he was, unfortunately died when he was relatively young. He was 60.
Mm-hmm.
And he played at Carnegie Hall many times. He was good.
He was really
From what I never heard him play the violin. That's the funny thing.
Right.
All those years, I never heard him play. But he was good. I mean, he had to be. He could play those, to be written up in the papers and all that. So, and my aunt was my aunt who was born here.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was very strict, and every day she had to practice 2 hours. So she ended up being a classical pianist. She can play classics. I mean, she used to sit down. I couldn't believe how. You know how David plays for us?
Yeah.
He could sit down and play anything.
Mm-hmm.
She was probably better than him because I remember her playing classical music, and now she hasn't played. She used to play the choir for choirs,
right.
The organist in the choirs, and so she gave me lessons in piano when I was a teenager, which didn't last too long, but it was enough to get me going. I can do this now. Not as good as you, but I can play. And the music probably is part of it's a big thing in the family because I have cousins. Well, at least one of them was in her husband's even in music. He played in the band, and her son he has his own band, and he created some CDs, and that's his thing. He has Emmanuel and the Fear is the name of the group, and they play in New York sometimes, and they travel around the world too. But he writes music, and he's like, you could tell his mind is always working in music.
Yeah.
And her oldest daughter, is a music teacher at high school. I think I forget the high school, but it's in Bergen County. Music teacher, and who else has musical? Anyway, there's a bunch of them in the family. Music was the thing. I guess it started with my grandfather and my uncle Nick.
Yeah.
In Russia.
Hmm.
The other side of the family, my father's side, never. I only saw my grandmother once. She came here to visit when I was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And my father's sister came when I was older. I was a teenager. She came to visit, but that was it. His father, I never met.
Yeah.
So, but they came here. My father came here in 1917.
In the United States.
To the United States.
Okay.
And my mother came here in 1935.
Okay. And why did they come over?
Why?
Yeah. Why did?
Well, my father left. The story goes. Who knows? The story goes that he was supposed to go to college.
Okay.
In Greece or somewhere, London maybe. Usually a lot of Greeks went to England in those days. Mm-hmm. And so some relative took the money to go to England to do something, and they squandered all the money that my father was going to use to go to college. So he got upset, packed his bags at 17, got onto a ship, almost died with a water mine, hit his ship almost. He saw the mine, just missed his boat. He told me a few stories, and he ended up in the U.S. by himself. Actually, I don't know if he was by himself. He had two brothers.
Okay.
The oldest brother, I think, might have been here. I'm not sure if he was here yet, but my father he worked in a steel mill. Mm-hmm. He worked as a waiter. In his last few years as a waiter, he worked. He traveled. He said all the way up to the Mississippi River. He said he traveled not past the Mississippi. In those days, there was nothing past the Mississippi River. Chicago he liked. He was there when Al Capone he told me the story. Al Capone was in Chicago. He said he heard the gunfire for the St. Valentine's Day massacre.
Oh my gosh.
He was near there when he heard the gunfire. And he waited on this Al Capone one time, he told me, in Chicago when he was a waiter there.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, that's your claim to fame with Al Capone. But anyway, what other stories? Any other, you
So how did your mom get here? Your dad came by himself?
He came by himself. Actually, he's not in Ellis Island. He's not listed. He came through Boston.
Okay.
A lot of people came through Boston in those days.
Okay.
And he told me he actually stayed in Boston a while. So he told me the place he worked in a hotel up there. And when I went up there, I used to go for business sometimes. I saw the hotel. Mm-hmm. It was a nice hotel. It was still there after all those years. And my mother, she came with her family.
Okay.
In 1935.
Okay.
34, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
34, she came here. My aunt was born in 35. My grandfather hadn't seen my grandmother in a while, so they got together and they had a baby right away.
Oh, because they were both from the same island, right?
Both, yeah.
So they knew each other.
No, my grandmother and her husband. Yeah, they were all.
Yeah,
my father too.
Right?
My father was also from both sides of the family.
Right.
We're both from Cali.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay.
But when they came here, my grandfather, my mother's father,
mm-hmm.
moved from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
They came here earlier.
Right.
To try to get a business going, and my grandmother and all the kids stayed in Greece.
Right.
In Piraeus.
Okay.
They were down there, and then in the 20s, they came here in the 20s, and they finally got enough money. They had enough money to get them to come over.
Right.
So in 34, the whole family came
mm-hmm.
over. So my grandfather was a very energetic, what I understand. I knew him as an old man,
mm-hmm.
but he was energetic as far as creating business for himself. He went to the leather business he had in Russia. Well, here he ended up a fur business. In those days, furs were big,
right.
a big thing. So he used to go down in the lower Manhattan. All the furriers down there were Jewish. So he would go to, the story goes, I heard it from several people, so it may be true.
Okay.
So he goes to, we go to one Jewish guy and said, I can do this and that. So after 2 weeks, the guy knew he knew nothing. So he fired him.
Okay.
But he would do this to a bunch of them. And finally, he learned how to do everything.
Right.
And he started his own business, doing furs, and then got his sons into it, except for the musician. He didn't get into the fur business. He was into his music. And my mother, too. My mother became a forewoman at a big company in New York, furs. Like a foreman. She's a forewoman. And when I was born and my sister, she had to quit. So basically the family went into the fur business. And my father also was in that business. For both sides of the family ended up in that business because it was something, I guess for some reason, the Greeks got into that in that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was booming.
Right.
Because one of my mother's brothers also had a fur shop in Nutley.
Okay.
You know Mike Kambarakis?
Yes.
Okay. He's related.
Okay. To you?
To me.
Okay.
He's related.
So that makes sense.
Yes. We didn't know that. The story goes he was here one time for his father's funeral. This is my mother was still alive then. This is before 92. And my father John remembered the last name. They spelled it with a C. They probably changed it from the Greek. Mm-hmm. Mike Kambarakis spells it with a K.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same name. So they started talking to my mother. He started talking. He introduced them, and they talked. And they started connecting people in the family.
Right.
So his relative, I don't know if it was, but related somehow to my grandfather on my mother's side. Mm-hmm. They were either cousins or brothers. They had the business together in Russia.
Oh,
he found out. He went to Greece and made the connections. He talked to people.
Right.
And I think his mother also is related to someone in Russia. So anyway, Mike is in the fur business.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
Right, but before that, he has, I think, a PhD in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
He says everybody was crazy in that field, so he got out of it. That's what he told me, which makes sense.
Logical.
What else was I? I forgot. I lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. So we were talking about. God, I lost my train of thought. Oh no, we were saying how your mother came here in 35.
34. She came in
34,
34,
sorry.
and 35. My aunt was born.
Right.
and we lived in Brooklyn.
Okay.
Now within 3 blocks, 4 blocks, 52nd Street, 53rd. I grew up in 53rd Street.
Mhm.
My grandfather, in those days, there was a beautiful house on 53rd Street in Brownstone.
Mhm.
It was built by a banker, the big banker on the corner on Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn. Uh, was the owner or the whatever the CEO of the bank.
Okay.
He built this house, Brownstone, before any other houses were built. This is early 1900s.
Okay.
And it was a beautiful house. If you looked at it, it was a brownstone with a basement, part basement. You could see, you could have windows, you could see out. And first floor, and then the top floor. And then on the side, there was a big open space for cars, or in those days, wagons, horses, to go in the back. And there's another building in the back
Right.
for the servants. On the top floor were the servants, and in the bottom was a garage that could open. You could fit 2, 3 cars. Eventually, you can fit 3 cars in there. The big doors open
Right.
wide. We grew up there, running around, playing in there. When we were kids. When I was born, we lived on the top floor, and so the family, all the relatives who had come from Greece, we ended up congregating at my grandmother's house, because she was related to probably most of them, because they were from Kalymnos. And Kalymnos is known for sponge divers. Kalymnos is known for the sponges, natural sponge. And in those days, I don't know if you do it now, but the natural sponge is what companies use to dye their shoes. I don't know if it's still the same, because synthetic sponge doesn't work. You have to use a natural sponge. So Tarpon Springs, you've heard of Tarpon Springs? Well, they were settled by Kalymnians.
Right.
And they still have, they don't do it anymore, but they have, displays and people going down to show how the divers did it, the hard hats.
Right.
So the people would congregate there. So there were people living on 52nd Street. We were on 53rd. When eventually we bought our own house on 54th. There were people on 55th and 56th. They're all related somehow. So we used to congregate at my grandmother's house. It was nice, because I miss all that, because you grow up that way. And eventually people started getting married, leaving. But after they bought that house, they lived there since probably to the 50s, because I was born in 44. And I grew up in Brooklyn when the Brooklyn Dodgers were still there. And I was a Yankee fan.
Oh my God.
And I used to get abused in school all the time. And when the Dodgers finally beat the Yankees in the World Series, I really got abused. I was walking home that day. I remember going to junior high. I think it was junior high. I remember walking home. Back then, the little transistor radios were the big thing. And you carried it with you. My wife still has hers at home. It still works.
Oh my God.
It's transistor. I mean, it's transistor, solid state, but a little radio. And she uses it. Sometimes she goes outside in the back and sits down. So that's basically it. And then they bought a house in Nutley, beautiful house, was not there anymore. They tore it down because he died, and then his wife died, and then they sold it. And I guess that must be my buzzer.
It's okay.
Yeah, that's my wife. Hold on a second.
No problem.
Can I
I can pause it. Yep.
My daughter's working on their house, so she has no washing and dryer.
Oh.
So she brings her stuff now to my house.
So we were talking about.
My grandfather coming here.
Oh, about Brooklyn,
Yeah,
about how
Brooklyn,
you
yeah.
lived.
It was all family, close.
Right.
Close family, and you never realized that everybody doesn't live forever. So the biggest shock in my life was when my grandfather died. I was 11 years old. We went to my cousin, who was 4 years younger, to his birthday party on 53rd Street, where they had the brownstone. And back then, when my grandfather bought the house, just to diverge a little bit,
That's okay.
he paid $10,000. This is early 40s or late 30s. I forget when he bought it. But they were late 30s. 10,000 in those days was like
A lot of money.
Well, who knows? It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I lost my train of thought again. Anyway, he bought the house and he used the basement to run his fur business.
Okay.
He set up machines sewing machines, and they used to cut the fur, the pelts, and all this other stuff. And then, but it wasn't legal.
Right.
So some neighbor or somebody spotted that, and they reported him. So he had to move his fur business, buy another building. This is someone who came here with probably nothing, and he built up. He got enough money to do all this stuff.
Right.
That wasn't a huge amount of money, but enough to survive. And he had his family working for him. Not far away, 55th and 4th Avenue. And he had a storefront where he could run his business. So that's what he did for. After they reported him, she had to move. And then in '55, when he passed, was it 1955? I was 11. Yeah, 1955. It was the day after we went to my cousin's party at 53rd Street, birthday. That night, he died. Next morning, we get a call. My grandmother went to wake him in the morning, and he was dead. He was dying. He was dead in the bed. And we all ended up at the house. I mean, it was a shock to me because you never had anybody dying in the family, anybody. You didn't think about it when you were a kid. And then 2 years later, one of his sons died, the one who had the first shop out here.
Oh, okay.
And I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, so those were big. My grandmother describes these events in her autobiography as really earth-shattering for her, losing her husband first, and then her son.
Right.
And then her oldest son later. She was still alive. Well, she lived to 90 almost. So she saw almost all her kids die. The only three survived. Survived her. Now there's only one left in Florida. My aunt, that was born in the U.S. So I miss all that stuff. Let's put it that way. It's you get used to things. The world was different. Oh my God.
It's okay.
Hello. I think
So where were we? So can you talk about your childhood growing up in a Greek household, like a really Greek household, obviously?
It was very Greeky.
Yeah.
It was. I didn't speak any English. I went to kindergarten, and the teacher punished me because she thought I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know what she was saying, and my family didn't think of it. I guess that I wouldn't understand the teacher. Eventually, I learned English. And the Greek helped me at my English because I knew the Greek, somehow the pronunciation. And when I speak to some people now, not as much now because I think I lost that accent for the Greek. But they still say, what part of Greece are you born in? When they hear me speak, they say, I'm born here.
Yeah.
So it's just, your first language is the one you're going to know the best.
Right.
I don't know it as well as I know English, but it's so growing up with it was all Greek, and in those days you didn't really associate with people who were not Greek, except when you went to work. My mother went to work with the fur business. My aunt went to work in the fur business eventually. One of the aunts, there were two aunts, three aunts, two aunts and my mother. They were related. They were their sisters, and except for my aunt Maria, she didn't go to the fur. My aunt Anna and my mother were in the fur business. So you didn't associate with other than Greeks. We used to go to the Greek, the Kalimnian dance once a year, or whatever. And it was, oh my God, I used to hate that because you had to go on the subway into Manhattan to the Waldorf Astoria, one of those big places, and all the Kalimnians would show up and have a dance. A lot of people do that now with different, like the Carpathians have their thing. And going home though, it was 3 a.m. You're on the subway, and you're dying because you want to sleep. And in those days, the subways were a lot safer than they are now. You didn't worry about crime as much. This was in the 50s probably. And so, but the family was pretty much very close. I mean, we ate Greek food. I was the only one in the family of the kids that ate the fasulada, faki, and fava.
Mm-hmm.
None of the other kids would ever eat that stuff.
Right.
I was the only one that I liked it, so I ate that. But I forgot what the autobiography. I should have brought the book with me.
That's okay.
It says how many grandchildren and great grandchildren and great grandchildren she had. I think it was 23
Mm.
great grandchildren, 9 grandchildren,
Mm.
23 great grandchildren. I'm not sure about great great. There was a number there. I forgot the number.
Wow.
So she had a lot of progeny that
Yeah.
really. Um, and on my father's side, it was the same. He when they met here, my father was the fur business was dying, so they met. They got married. My mother got married in 39, 39 I think, 38, 39. Yeah. My father actually was older, much older.
Mm-hmm.
He was when she was 24. He was 45.
Wow.
No, not 45. That's too much. He was 40.
Okay.
He was 16 years older. When I was born, he was 45. Yeah, so he was born 1899.
Wow.
Think about that. It was different. And then my grandfather, my mother's father, was born 1876,
Wow.
1877. So those people had come from a totally different time. That's we're talking maybe even 2 generations before.
Yeah.
So my grandmother says the only thing that kept her going in her autobiography, because I was reading it and it actually made me cry thinking about how tough it was and the things. But her faith, she was the first one in church.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the funny thing is, even in Russia, the favorite church was St. George, because next to the house in Kalimnos,
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to mention something. There was a St. George church next to them.
Mm-hmm.
So she always remembered that. And then when they went to Russia, the church that was right near them was St. Panteleimon,
Mm-hmm.
which is my second name,
Mm.
which is the day after I was born. I was born July 26th. St. Panteleimon is 27th. So my
Okay.
mother gave me my name after my grandmother, Angelus, but my second name is Panteleimon,
Okay.
which is the day after. But also, that was that church that was next to my grandmother in Russia, or her house, and my grandfather. So she said her faith, she's always in church. She used to go sit in the same spot, right there, halfway down on this side, right in the same. And she used to take the bus where they 53rd Street where they live. They walk down half a block, and the bus is on the corner. And they would take her to church about 2, 3 miles away. Give me sister talking. And that's where we grew up. And she was always the first one in church. All the time she was there. So it says this is what kept her going all those years. Her faith in God and Jesus. And no matter where she went, in Greece, in Russia, here, she always made sure there was a church nearby. So that's what kept her going even after all these the children who died. Three of the 6 died I'm not sure. Some died in Greece and some died in Russia. I'm not sure now the split. I forget what she said. But it was, it's a tough life when you don't realize how easy we have it
Yeah.
compared to some of the things that they went through in those days. When my father came here in 1917, and he worked his way, he worked in New York and Boston and Chicago. He went to Florida. He said there was massive discrimination. If you weren't, especially in the South,
Mm-hmm.
if you were a Catholic, a Jew, and they used to call him goddamn Greek, get out of, they used to really pick on him.
Mm-hmm.
You were different, and you had an accent to boot. I mean, he spoke pretty well after a while, but
Took a while.
there's a lot of discrimination for mostly in the South. Um, he was in Florida before anybody knew Florida existed. Probably he used to go down there in Daytona Beach,
Mm-hmm.
because you used to have a motorcycle. He told me in those days. I would imagine what a motorcycle was, but and his brother got angry at him one time and destroyed his motorcycle. He says, "You're not going to ride that." His older brother. He was like the head of the family in the U.S. So, and eventually all the family broke up and split up, and I went to college. we lived on 54th Street, 1 block away,
Mhm.
growing up, and then we ended up in another house in Brooklyn. Most of the time, Brooklyn. But then I had a job. My next job, I could have taken a job when I graduated college with electrical engineering, a degree from CCNY. Um, I could have taken a job at Cape Canaveral at the space program.
Hmm.
I would have been unemployed though, a few years later, because
Yeah.
when I went down there, I got a job and I ended up going there for business to visit Cape Canaveral to do some work down there. It was a ghost town. Cocoa Beach, which is just south of Cape Canaveral, was a ghost town.
Mhm.
And this is only a few years after I would have had the job there, so I would
Right.
have been unemployed. So luckily, I chose the Connecticut. But my parents, I had to help support them at the time, so I took them with me.
Mhm.
We had an apartment in Stamford, Connecticut in 1967. The apartment went for $170 a month. Huge, almost 3 bedrooms, huge apartment in the center of Stamford, Connecticut. You know, now that apartment probably going easily, I'm guessing 2,000, maybe
Mhm.
more.
Right.
If it's still there, who knows? But back then it was just to show you the pay of people. When I started with an electrical engineering degree, I
Mhm.
got the average starting salary, $8,400 a year. Now it's probably 84,000,
Right.
the average starting salary. So it's a factor of 10.
Yeah.
We were able to buy a car in 1973 when we got married, a Datsun. Before it became Nissan, it was Datsun.
Right.
And for 3,000,
Mhm.
because the oil crisis began then. So we were getting 35 miles to the gallon then with a 4-speed stick. And the average car now is 30,000. So it's a factor of 10 roughly.
Mhm.
If things have gone, certain things. Other things have gotten cheaper. Telephone calls are a lot cheaper than they were then. I
Yeah.
call California, then it costs you $10, $20 for a long distance call.
Yeah.
So a lot of things are relative. Everything's relative.
Mhm.
Beautiful TVs, computers.
Mhm.
And back in then, you buy a black and white, it cost you $300 or $400. Now you $300 400, you get a beautiful 40-inch LED.
Right.
It's everything's relative to many things, but there are some things that hasn't changed that much.
Mhm.
So where was I? In Brooklyn?
Your mother being religious.
Grandmother, yeah, my grandmother,
Grandmother.
yeah, my mother's mother, yeah.
So, how was religion observed in your home growing up?
Um, well, we had an iconostat in every house. You know the iconostasi,
Mhm.
where you put your icons, and we weren't, we went to church every Sunday. I was an altar boy in Kimis Teotoko. Started when I was a little kid, probably 7, 8 years old. The picture of the outside, there's a pictures of the priests that were here.
Mhm.
Look at the one that says Father Strangilos.
Mhm.
He's bald. He was the priest at
Oh,
Kimis
okay.
at the time. I think he was here first, and then he went to Kimis in Brooklyn. So his pictures out there. Anyway, so we used to go to church all the time, and it was nothing. I mean, we used to get together, especially on Easter. On Easter night, we used to get together.
Mhm.
On Saturday night, after the service, the resurrection service, we used to get together in Brooklyn. People would come in from Queens, from other places to get together at my grandmother's house for the eat lamb, whatever. I would never eat the. I ate the lamb and the rice, but not the stuff that's made with intestines.
The liver?
The liver, no, I like liver, but the stuff that they brew up with the intestines.
I know it, yeah.
Patsa.
Patsa, yeah.
Patsa, yeah, not for me, not even now.
I don't like it either.
I ain't going to go for that. What else? So yeah, that's about it. I mean, people would come. My grandmother's house was the central headquarters,
Okay.
basically, and we basically everything was related to church, pretty much. And as we got older, we started going to high school, doing other things,
Mhm.
but we didn't have as many alternative entertainment things like we do now. We have computers, we got Facebook, we got like everything going on.
Mhm.
Phone call, the cell phones. Back then, you had phone, and the phone there was only one phone. It was in the hall,
Mhm.
and if you went on the other side of the house, you had to run to get the phone in the hallway and answer it there. That was it. There were no extensions. Well,
Right.
you could have had an extension, but they charged you extra for that. But as far as the religious, that was it. Pretty much it. You know,
Yeah.
we didn't do much of anything special.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think if we did anything different. And name days. You know, we used to
Right.
celebrate name days. Usual stuff.
Mhm. So how did that religion play a role in your understanding of Greek heritage, if at all?
Well, it's part of the Greek heritage because in those days it was intertwined because I didn't really understand the religion as much as I did the Greek culture.
Mhm.
The religion was tough because you just did what you had to go to church, you had to listen to the I didn't understand a lot of the stuff that went on. They didn't read any, and most of it was in Greek. Almost all of it was in Greek. Nowadays we alternate Greek and English. We switch. So a lot of things I didn't understand, but I just followed the rules,
Mhm.
sometimes blindly. And I understand a lot more now, obviously, but what was going on. But in those days, you didn't you didn't question.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Mhm. Um. What did I say? Oh, so has that overlapped in your life with your children and grandchildren?
Well, it reminded me of something that Father Angelo said today, and it was in the bulletin they wrote up.
Mhm.
He wrote up right up about fatherhood, and he mentioned a study that was done um, that said that was an Anglican study. They saw that when mothers only brought children home to church, 40% of them would attend church regularly as their adults. When mothers and fathers brought the children together, 60% would attend church regularly as adults. When only fathers brought the children to church, 80% of the study showed that they would attend church regularly as adults. So my wife was Catholic, but she eventually became Orthodox. Uh, but I used to bring my kids with me all the time, and she sometimes she did, but barely, not too often. She didn't get up. She couldn't get up in the morning early, so I would bring them with me. But I had to get up early anyway
Right.
because I was usually involved with the choir, and so they would come with me early. And basically, I brought them every Sunday with me. So I don't know. They how did that? What was the question again? I don't know.
Oh, has that overlapped in your
Yeah,
life, your
that's
religion?
basically probably because I did that. I went to church all the time back then
Mhm.
on a regular basis as an altar boy, and we even had teams, altar boy teams that used to go and play sports like
Mhm.
football and some other stuff and kill each other playing football. And I don't know what else we played, but anyway, so the fact that probably it got into me that I had to do that same thing.
Mhm.
And I did. I brought my kids almost every Sunday. Uh, at first, it was tough because my son was too young. He was a little guy. He wasn't. I couldn't leave him alone. But when he started going to Sunday school, then I could go back to the choir.
Mhm.
I don't think how I did that. I don't even know how I did that because I started directing the choir in '74.
Okay.
Father John said to me, Angelo, you know how you can just wave your arms. You know,
Hmm.
you can do this choir thing. Because he knew I had played. He remembered me. I knew Father John from Brooklyn.
Okay.
He was my Sunday school teacher,
Okay.
and he remembered me when we finally ended up here. Oh, we both ended up in Connecticut, by the way. He was in Orange, and I was in Stanford.
Okay.
I didn't even know he was there.
Mhm.
So I lived there for about 5 years in Stanford, and then moved back to Brooklyn, and then eventually New Jersey. And then suddenly I ended up in the church before here in '73 was in
Passaic
Passaic, was it Passaic?
on Hamilton.
Hamilton Ave, yeah. So I ended up there, and I see Father John there. So Olga Parks, do you remember Olga Parks?
I'm interviewing her.
Really?
Hopefully.
Okay.
She's very old.
She's very old. Yeah, mother lived to, oh, really old. She's in there too. Her brain is still sharp.
Mhm.
My wife talks to her sometimes, calls her, and she was the choir director. She had an operatic voice. She used to sing opera. and she got tired of directing. So Father John, when they moved here, Father John remembered me from Brooklyn because I used to play the organ sometimes at the end of the service while they were getting on the other.
Mm-hmm.
I go up there and fool around with the organ
Mm-hmm.
because my aunt was the organist. So I said, I'll just play a few pieces from you, not religious music,
Right.
Ludovico or something. So he remembered, and when I came here, he says, just go wave your hands, Angelo, you can do it. Well, that was torture because I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
And there was no room up there. There was a wall here. I don't know if you remember the original build.
Here, no, I don't think.
The choir loft, you know where the steps begin?
Okay.
To go up to the
Mm-hmm.
back? That's where there was a wall. It was closed.
So this door, that door up there.
No, that was okay. You could walk in, but you know where the steps are to go up to the back?
Oh, it was a wall.
The first, right at where the bed, the first step, there was a wall.
Okay.
There was nothing in the back.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to squeeze everybody into that space standing
Yeah.
with an organ.
Oh my God.
It was, I think, an older. It wasn't this organ. It was an older, smaller one. But and I think at the time, Mary Gagas.
Okay.
She was the organist in Passaic, and I think she ended up here too for the first few years. And then after her, I think it was Jean Dalpan, which was here today. She came to visit.
Oh.
I saw her today. Anyway, so I'm trying to remember how I did that, and I had my son. I probably left him home because he was too young till Sunday school started. Anyway, my daughter was not so easy though. She couldn't be left alone.
Right.
He was okay with hanging out in there. But when I put my daughter finally into Sunday school, and I was directing the choir at that time, in the middle of the service, they would come up and say, "Your daughter needs you." So I had to run down, either calm her down or bring her up with me. So it was crazy sometimes. Mm-hmm. It was crazy, but I lost my train again. Did I change my path?
No, you didn't. We were just talking about if it overlapped in your life.
Yeah, basically the overlap. That was basically it. The kids, I brought them here to St. George, and they grew up here. I mean, they were in Goya. They Sights and Sounds.
Mm-hmm.
I did the Sights and Sounds for a while. My daughter, it was a big group then, the Sights and Sounds. In the Junior Olympics, I did that for almost 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
That was, finally gave it up after I had enough. It was fun most of the time.
The church, the religion you mean?
Yeah, I mean, as far as bringing in, hanging out, and being with the church, Father John was a very driven type priest, like his son George was for a while. Different kind of priest. He didn't have a good voice. I don't know if you remember his singing voice was not very good. But he did. I think he took lessons and he improved over the years. Originally, he was bad. I mean, he had terrible. He was tone deaf, and he improved. But and he gave decent sermons too, what I remember. But he was I knew him longer than everybody except his wife, probably. Oh, actually, I knew him before he met his wife, because she was at the Kimisis too.
Oh, okay.
She was there in Kimisis. I remember her from Kimisis. That's how she knew me too. So at the time they were, I think that's where they met, probably.
Okay.
And then they ended up in Connecticut after he became a priest. And then I ended up here in New Jersey. I thought it was a big deal. I got a raise, but coming to New Jersey, I didn't have to. I remember my auto insurance rates was like getting a raise.
Yeah.
It dropped so fast. I used to living in Brooklyn. Your rates were crazy. For automobile insurance. So the religion was pretty much a big part.
Mm-hmm.
From then transferred to now.
Right. Okay. So we talked about that. What is your actually? Have you visited Greece recently?
I have never been to Greece.
Okay, so can you?
There's not much I can say.
So that next question doesn't overlap. So
either did my father ever go back.
Oh, okay.
Even he came here in 1917. He never went back. He was what? He was 199. He was about 18 years old.
Okay.
Packed his bags and
left.
Went through France at the time on a ship. There were no planes.
Right.
He took a ship, and he never went back. He says he didn't really feel like going back. He didn't. At the time, it wasn't that great to be in Greece.
Right.
And then later he said he didn't like what he heard, what was going on. I don't know, the politics or whatever. I don't know what it was, but just didn't feel like he wanted to go back.
Do you have any connections with Kalimba still?
We have relatives there. Yeah, my aunt actually, his sister, my father's sister,
Mm-hmm.
passed away a few years ago. No, more than a few years. Well, she lived to almost 110.
Oh, yeah.
She was, and probably because she was active.
Mm-hmm.
She took care of her daughter's family. The island of Kalimnos is hilly and rocky,
Mm-hmm.
so you have to, you take care of wildlife, goats and things,
Right.
And she was always active, from what I understand. I met her once. She came here, and she was going and taking care of helping our daughters. I don't know if that's true. It wasn't that much of a house person, a homemaker.
Mm-hmm.
So she probably, my aunt probably had to do a lot of the work, take care of the goats, climb the mountains. I don't know whatever she did, but it somehow made she lived to almost 110.
Right.
And at the time, she was blind. Near the end, she was almost, she said, almost totally blind. She was still doing this stuff.
Wow.
So physical exercise is good.
Yeah.
It's up to a point.
Yeah.
You can overdo it, but I never. My sister did go back. She
Okay.
went to Europe, but we went to Europe on our honeymoon, but we never went to Greece. We went to Austria and Germany, southern Germany, Bavarian Alps, and Austria
Okay.
uh, in the winter,
Mm.
in March,
Mm.
early March, and it was interesting. It was a very what do you call it? Different. It's a different kind of life. Well, this was in this early. This was in 1973, so a lot different than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking over 40 years ago.
Right.
We're married 45 years this year, so it was 45 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Um, but that was the only time I went to Europe, and then I had gone. I used to travel to London area for work. That was it. No Greece.
Right.
No.
It happens.
I heard. I mean, I talked to a lot of people, and now people are telling me it's not what it used to be. But a lot of crime is going on
Mm-hmm.
in Greece. Anthi tells me when she goes back, she says she's afraid to go back where she lives. She lives in Athens, I guess, near
Yeah.
Athens. And she told me she's afraid. But I guess maybe on the islands like Kalymnos, Karpathos, maybe they're not as many criminals. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, there are, but not as
But you've
many.
been there, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. It's from what people are telling me, it's not what it was 40 years ago. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But for many reasons, political, financial, I don't know, other things like that.
Right.
Um,
So what do you see as the biggest challenge? This is like a little switching gears now. So
Okay.
what do you see as the biggest challenge facing Greece today?
The biggest challenge that I see is, let's see, probably the fact that they want to pay everybody something, and there's no one to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they want to collect money and give money away, especially to new these immigrants that are coming over from Africa and the Middle East. Whenever you decide socialism is the biggest problem, which they've been doing for a long time. Not only Greece, but Italy and a few other
Mm-hmm.
countries. If you want to give money to people to help them, someone has to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually those who are paying for it are going to run out of money too. So it's like it's gonna work. It's gonna backfire. That's why they have all these problems. And I think that's the biggest problem is that you can't get something for nothing.
Right.
Eventually, so it's gonna, and they're trying to do that here, and they should learn from their history. I read an author once that wrote about the history of empires. Empires start declining in the 3rd century. Great empires like the Roman Empire, the Greeks,
Mm-hmm.
the other empires. Usually in the 3rd century. We're in the 3rd century here.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're in a decline, but maybe not severe yet. But we might have a chance. But because people start demanding more things, and this is the reason the empires fell, even in Rome and after Rome, the Middle Ages, the Holy Roman Empire, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
People wanted more, and when people start demanding more, more things, more goodies, and they being taken care of, you start getting trouble,
Mm-hmm.
having trouble. And I think that's the problem with Greece. They can't afford it, first of all.
Right.
Because people have to go down to, I think they have to, if they're getting a pension from Greece, I understand, they have to go back every year to get their,
I think so.
verify that they're,
Yeah.
they're still alive.
Yeah.
The same with my wife has a friend, for years she's had a friend, her husband is Italian, and he gets a pension from Greece, even though he still works here. He gets a pension from there. He worked when he was younger, he was there. But his wife also gets one. She never worked in Greece. She's an American citizen. She was born here.
Right.
So she gets a pension too from Italy. Nice. She has to go there every year to prove that they're both active, that they're alive. But it sounds like a little, and you're living in the richest country in the world,
Right.
and you're still getting this. So you can't survive that way.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, something's going to happen. Revolutions. Maybe that's what happened in Russia too with the Tsar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the same idea, but the Tsar it maybe was more oppressive there, but it didn't work.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest problem with Greece, is they have to
Hone it in.
start cutting back. Like when Dr. Tsanakos, when he was telling me when he retired, and they started when the Greek problem showed up in the economy over there, they cut his pension 10,000. And he was here getting a pension. He retired. So he was getting $10,000. He told me.
Wow.
So that's a big. He must have been getting a nice pension, but 10,000 is a big chunk.
Right.
No matter what you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, for sure. That is a crazy cut, actually, because.
I know, right?
Yeah. So, what is your reaction towards the ongoing conflict between Turkey and Greece?
I'm not sure. Is there an ongoing? And the only conflict is in
Cyprus.
Cyprus.
Yeah. Right. That's.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's my reaction is that the Turks have to get out. They have to leave. But if they're allies, because we're allies with Turkey too,
right.
and Greece. If we demanded things, it might change, because they're also part of NATO. But I'm not sure exactly what's going on there right now. But I know that there are people like Kypros Bafitis. Do you remember him?
No.
He used to sing in the choir.
Maybe I saw his face.
They live in his daughter and son-in-law. Well, they're all in Cyprus now. But his daughter is Silvana. She comes here once in a while with her. Anyway, they were here. He told me that when the Turks moved in and they took over property, they took his property.
Right.
So imagine someone coming into your house and saying, "This is my house now."
Right.
You get lost. That's it. That's what happened to him. So that has to. They can't continue. I don't know if they're still doing it. I don't know, but
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure about that. But the problem will never end as long as people. First of all, Turkey, for some reason, want to be there. Why? There are people that live there. They're Turkish citizens that are living on Cyprus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is Turkey just taking over land because there's something there that they need, minerals or something? I don't know. Or they're just doing it because they want to acquire property, more power? I'm not sure. So it's hard to tell what probably someone from there would tell you the true story and what's going on, but I don't know that much about it.
That's okay.
Yeah, so
Very good.
most people probably don't.
Yeah. So my last question is basically if there's anything that I might have missed that you'd like to mention about your Greek American experience.
Greek American experience. I probably said everything I could, but that you missed.
Don't have to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Is there anything? Nothing really.
Okay. So this is all I have.
Okay.
That was it.
Thank you.
That
was fun.
Yeah.
I hope I didn't put you to sleep.
No, not at all.